Welcome, everyone. Glad you're here.
So today's topic is all about food texture.
We're not talking about flavor. We're talking about how food feels in your mouth.
Exactly. In this video, we'll introduce several common English words used to describe different textures.
You'll hear these words a lot when people talk about snacks, meals, or even restaurant reviews.
Easy to learn, easy to use. Let's jump in.
Crispy.
When you hear the word crispy, one of the most classic foods people think of is fried chicken, especially that golden, crunchy outer layer.
But it's not just fried chicken. In everyday English, we use crispy to describe a lot of foods like bacon, when it's cooked extra crispy, French fries, potato chips, onion rings, fried shrimp, or even toast.
People often say food is crispy on the outside and tender on the inside, and that's usually considered the perfect texture.
You might hear someone say, "The chicken is perfectly crispy on the outside." Or, "I like my bacon extra crispy." Those kinds of sentences are extremely common.
In casual conversation, phrases like nice and crispy or perfectly crispy come up all the time, especially when people are talking about fried or baked foods.
Flaky.
When we describe food as flaky, we mean it breaks apart into thin, light layers. Instead of snapping cleanly or bending, the food separates naturally, almost in sheets or flakes.
Flaky is all about layers. You usually notice it when you pull the food apart or take a bite, and it falls into delicate pieces.
The most classic examples of flaky foods are croissants, puff pastry, biscuits, pie crusts, and certain types of fish like salmon or cod. When those foods are well made, flaky is a very positive word.
You'll hear people say things like, "This croissant is perfectly flaky," or "The fish is light and flaky." In those cases, flaky means the texture is light, tender, and cooked just right.
Flaky is different from crispy. Crispy breaks with a snap, while flaky separates into layers. Something can be crispy on the outside and flaky on the inside, like a good pastry.
In everyday conversation, flaky is almost always a compliment when talking about baked goods or fish. It tells you the structure is right and the cooking was done well.
Tender and juicy.
These are actually two different words, but they're very often used together to describe the same eating experience, especially when we're talking about meat.
When food is tender, it means it's soft and easy to bite through. You don't have to chew hard, and it doesn't feel tough or dry. Tender piece of meat almost pulls apart when you bite into it.
When food is juicy, it means it has moisture inside. When you cut into it or take a bite, you can feel the juices, and sometimes you can even see them. That moisture is what keeps the food from feeling dry.
That's why people so often say food is tender and juicy. The tenderness comes from the texture of the meat, and the juiciness comes from the moisture inside, but together they describe one ideal result.
You'll hear people say things like, "The steak is tender and juicy," or this chicken breast is really tender and juicy. Those phrases are extremely common, especially when someone is praising how well something was cooked.
You can also use these words on their own. For example, slow-cooked meat is often very tender, while a burger or a steak is usually described as juicy. But when food is cooked just right, people love to use both.
Chewy.
When we say food is chewy, we mean it takes some effort to chew. It doesn't break easily and it doesn't fall apart right away when you bite into it. Instead, you have to keep chewing before you can swallow.
Chewy is not the same as tough. That's an important difference. Chewy can be a good thing depending on the food. For example, foods like bagels, mochi, taffy, gummy candy, or certain types of noodles are supposed to be chewy. That resistance when you bite into them is exactly what people enjoy.
You'll hear people say things like, "This bagel is nice and chewy," or "I love the chewy texture of mochi." In those cases, chewy is clearly a compliment.
However, chewy can also be negative if the food is not meant to be chewy. If a steak or chicken is chewy, that usually means it's overcooked or tough. In that case, people might say, "The steak is too chewy," or "This chicken is kind of chewy."
So when you hear the word chewy, think about resistance. When chewing, not crispy, not falling apart, but giving your teeth something to work on. Whether that's good or bad depends entirely on the food.
Sticky.
When we describe food as sticky, we mean it clings to things. It sticks to your fingers, it sticks to your teeth, and sometimes it even sticks to the plate or the wrapper.
Sticky is all about the surface feeling, not the sound or the bite. You notice it as soon as you touch the food, and you definitely notice it when you're eating it.
Some foods are meant to be sticky, and in those cases, it's a good thing. Think about foods like caramel, toffee, taffy, honey, syrup, or glutinous rice. People expect those foods to be sticky, and that texture is part of the experience.
You'll hear people say things like, "This candy is really sticky," or "My fingers are sticky after eating that." In those examples, sticky is just a neutral or descriptive word.
But sticky can also sound negative, especially when food isn't supposed to be that way. For example, overcooked rice, badly cooked pasta, or sauce that's too thick might be described as sticky. And in those cases, it usually sounds like a complaint.
Stretchy.
When we describe food as stretchy, we mean it stretches when you pull it. Instead of breaking right away, it forms long strands or strings before it finally snaps.
Stretchy is all about movement. You notice it when you pull the food apart, lift it with a fork, or take a bite and slowly pull away.
The most classic example of stretchy food is melted cheese, especially mozzarella. Think about pizza, grilled cheese, or cheese pulls in videos. That long, stringy stretch is exactly what people mean by stretchy.
You'll hear people say things like, the cheese is so stretchy, or I love how stretchy this mozzarella is. In those cases, stretchy is almost always positive and very visual.
Smooth.
When we describe food as smooth, we mean it feels even and soft, with no lumps, no roughness, and no grainy texture. It slides easily in your mouth and feels consistent from start to finish.
Smooth is all about how food feels on the surface and on your tongue. You don't have to chew much and there's no resistance. The texture feels calm, clean, and balanced.
Some very common examples of smooth foods include yogurt, pudding, custard, mashed potatoes, when they're well made, peanut butter, hummus, and creamy soups. Drinks like smoothies or milkshakes are also often described as smooth.
You'll hear people say things like, this yogurt is really smooth, or that soup has a nice smooth texture. In those cases, smooth is clearly a compliment.
Grainy.
When we describe food as grainy, we mean the texture feels rough or uneven, with tiny particles that you can feel on your tongue. Instead of feeling smooth and consistent, it feels slightly sandy or coarse.
Grainy is all about contrast with smooth. You notice it immediately when you take a bite or a sip, especially with foods that are supposed to be creamy or blended.
Common examples include badly made mashed potatoes, overcooked rice, certain sauces, or dairy products like yogurt or ice cream when the texture breaks down. In those cases, grainy usually sounds negative.
You'll hear people say things like, the mashed potatoes are a bit grainy, or this sauce tastes fine, but the texture is grainy. That usually means something went wrong during cooking or processing.
However, context still matters. Some foods are naturally grainy, and that's expected, like certain whole grain breads, polenta, or stone ground foods. In those situations, grainy can be more neutral and simply descriptive.
In everyday conversation, grainy is usually a negative word, especially when people expect something smooth. It means the texture feels uneven and not as pleasant. But a lot of the time, those grainy foods are actually healthier for you.